You'll hear some feedback just for a second till I close out of it. You'll hear some feedback just for a second. All right, Kevin, cue that music.
Like birds of a feather, I want you to know all of the people around us, they say, can they be that close? Just let me state for the record, we're giving love in a family dose. We are family. I got all my sisters with me. Just begun to get our share of this world's delight. High hopes we have for the future and our goals in sight. No, we don't get depressed. Here's what we call our golden rule. Have faith in you and the things you do. You won't go wrong. Oh no, this is our you. We are family. Sing it to me. I got all my sisters with me. Sing it to me. We are family. I can hear you, darling. Tell everybody to sing. We have faith in you. I know that you do. Hey, hey. I got all my sisters with me. We are family. Get up now.
If it happens. If you get that.
Whenever I call you friend, I begin to think I understand. Anywhere you and I always been, ever and ever. I see myself within your eyes, and that's all I need to show the world. Everything I do always takes me home.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for what will be an incredible 4-part series from Surviving to Thriving with Dr. Michelle Borba. I'm Kristen Brooks, Executive Director with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. And on behalf of Co-Director Kevin Schaefer, our team out of both Riverside and El Dorado counties, Dr. Michael Rowe, Renee Ramsey, and the rest of the Leadership, Innovation, and Outreach team from Riverside County and the California Department of Education, we are glad you are here to engage with us. As promised, our first 1,000 registrants will receive a copy of Dr. Borba's book, Thrivers, so keep an eye out for that if it has not already been sent your way. If you weren't able to register in the first 1,000, you can still purchase one on your own, but please know it is not required to be able to benefit from this series. We have many participants online with us who can access this webinar via Zoom or live streaming on YouTube and can participate using the chat or Q&A features. Please note that English to Spanish translation and American Sign Language interpretation is only available through Zoom as noted in the registration. But if you miss any portion of this webinar or future sessions, you'll receive a link to the recording and related resources in a follow-up email to the address you provided when you registered. Please be sure to check your junk or spam folders if you don't see the email come through in the next 24 to 48 hours. Our team will also be dropping links to a Padlet of resources where you can already begin accessing information related to this series. And before I hand it over to the incredible Dr. Borba, author and international renowned educational psychologist and expert in parenting, bullying, and character development, who has appeared hundreds of times across a plethora of networks, we have a brief welcome message from Dr. Edwin Gomez, Riverside County Superintendent of Schools. So thank you again to all of our partners who made this possible and at no cost to our families, educators, friends all across California.
Thank you for joining us today for From Surviving to Thriving with Dr. Michelle Borba. My name is Dr. Edwin Gomez, and I serve as the Riverside County Superintendent of Schools. We are excited that you are joining this 4-part series that will reveal insight about what it's like to be a student today and how we can come alongside them to support them as parents, teachers, mentors, and leaders. In the upcoming sessions, we'll be learning from Dr. Borba's research from her new book, Thrivers, which explains why some students struggle and others shine. As parents and educators, this is mission-critical information so that students can achieve the educational goals we are hoping they attain. Success by educational standards is inextricably tied to leading students from surviving to thriving. We can't focus on increasing literacy rates unless students feel confident trying and failing. We can't eliminate bullying and racism until students learn how to exercise kindness and empathy. We can't talk about improving college-going rates unless students believe in their own potential and envision their future. You see, it's all tied together, and that's what this 4-part series with Dr. Michelle Borba will be helping us to understand. Dr. Borba is a student of students, and she will be sharing relatable and applicable ideas to not only help students grow, but to help us grow as educators. Thank you to Dr. Borba, to the Leadership, Innovation, and Outreach team at the Riverside County Office of Education, to the El Dorado County Office of Education, and the Supporting Inclusive Practices team with the California Department of Education for making this webinar series possible. Our children, your children, and all children deserve more than just surviving. Thank you for investing the time to attend, participate, and engage with the content to help them thrive. Enjoy the series.
And with that, Dr. Borba, take it away.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here, and every one of you parents. I'm a mom of 3 boys. I was a former special ed teacher for years, and then I had this enormously wonderful opportunity to be able to fly all around the world and work with parents. And there's one thing that we know that we all have a bond and why we share a commonality. We love our kids dearly, and we want only the best for them. And so what I want to do, and I'm absolutely honored to be part of this for you, is share with you simple but proven strategies we can use to be able to help our kids move from surviving into thriving. And you're going to be getting handouts later on. I don't want you to look at anything right now, except maybe take one piece of paper, just one, or a small piece of paper, and write down just a couple of things that you hope that you want to use with your own family. My goal is to give you dozens of things. Please don't try all of these things or your kid will never let you come to another webinar as long as you live. Try one or two only. And I'm going to keep emphasizing one thing. We do know that if you try one simple little thing and you try it over and over again for at least 21 days, you're more likely to make a major difference in your kids' lives. Now, I want to start by sharing how I came upon this whole topic of resilience and this topic of thriving. And it actually happened years back when I was at University of California at Davis. I was a history major. I had big plans to be a history teacher. And then I went home just during the weekend. I lived up in Northern California in Saratoga, California. And I went home and I saw my dad, who was usually calm and collected, looking very, very agitated. And he was pacing up and down. He looked at me and he saw me. And all of a sudden he held something that he had in his hand and he held it up. And I noticed it was a Newsweek magazine. And on the cover were pictures of babies. And he said, Michelle, I want you to look at this, because it says in this article that the first 3 years of a child's life make it or break it. If that were true, I would be dead today. Now, I never knew my grandparents. They had passed away. My dad was older when he got married, and I was floored. I didn't know anything about my father's upbringing, but he began to describe some things about his background. So we're all on board together that you know that children do face adversity, but children can thrive and move from surviving to thriving. He began to tell me that his parents came as immigrants from Italy, very, very, very poor, spoke no English. And now when my grandfather was apparently, when my dad was 2, my grandfather passed away. Now my grandmother can't afford to raise her children. And so she has to put my dad and his 4 other siblings in an orphanage. At that point, he said, I could have died, but I had some things going for me. And I pass these on to you. For anybody worried about your family and your children, there's hope. The first thing he said is that he learned from a very early age empathy and love from the nuns who raised him. When he finally had enough money, his mom had enough money. It was the neighbor next door who realized the family was destitute. He taught my dad perseverance by raking leaves and giving him money. The local librarian realized my dad loved to read. And so she'd always give him some extra books. Go home, Danny, go home and you can read them. The teacher knew that he loved to also write. And so she'd give him extra journals and help him write. What happened is that my father had protective factors. First, he had buffers along the way, which were people. The single most important commonality of a child who thrives is you, a parent. A loving parent who refuses to give up on the child. It doesn't make any difference what your zip code is. What does make the difference is that you love your child desperately and say, I'm always there for you. But the second thing my dad said he learned along the way was coping skills, strategies, like how to endure, how to handle failure, how to cope. All those little things that now we know also help our children thrive. So there's 2 things, people and protective factors. Both of those we can teach together. My dad did okay. He went through a depression. He was in World War II. Every teacher later on told him, I don't know if you're going to graduate, Dan. He did. He graduated from UC Berkeley, but he did something else. And that is he married my mom, who was incredible. My dad also became a school superintendent. And from that moment on, he convinced everyone that it's all about us. We can all help our children move from surviving to thriving. The first thing is we got to have a mindset that this is doable. And that's what we're all here today going, it makes no difference what your obstacle is. Children can thrive. The next thing is you want some proof? Well, I was at University of California, Davis. That day, when I left my father, I went back and I immediately changed my major. No longer history. I was now a psychology major. And I came across this woman. Her name was Dr. Amy Werner. This woman changed my life with a piece of research that she was doing, similar to my dad, of how come some kids overcome. Once again, if you're ever worried about your children, what Dr. Werner did was identify hundreds of children growing up in the island of Kauai. Imagine this. She identified children who were really suffering from enormous obstacles, from poverty to sexual abuse, to schizophrenic parents to homelessness. And she and a whole cohort of psychiatrists, pediatricians, decide to study the same group of kids, not only when they're in elementary school, but they decide to study the same group of kids for the next 40 years. What happens to kids when they go from adversity to adulthood? The most amazing thing Dr. Werner discovered is that 1/3 of them made it even during their teens. And the reason they became confident, and caring was once again, because each of them had a you. And if it wasn't you, it was a teacher, or it was great Aunt Sally, or it was grandma. The first thing I want you to do is ask yourself, who are people that your children need around them to let them know I care for you, I'm not giving up on you. People who are good models to your children, people who are always at a beck and call, that your child has their text number or a phone number. Because very often when we're not there, they need somebody else at their beck and call. I think the first part of your index card is to write down a couple of names. Make sure your children have those names. The second thing is we're going to start looking at what makes kids thrive. And we do know you're part of it. But the other part, says Emmy Werner, says Norm Gormese, says Ann Matston, phenomenal researchers who are doing the same thing, proved exactly what my dad said. The first 3 years don't make or break a child's life. It's what happens along the way. Because what we do want, please, parents, is for our children to become resilient. Resilient means they're going to bounce back. They're all going to suffer adversity. You know they are. We can't rescue them. We can't always be there at their beck and call. But some kids are able to bounce back and make it. And we do know that, once again, it's not DNA or their backpacks or their GPAs that make it. Instead, we realize there's something else in their lives. Now, first of all, I want you to all take a moment and we're going to breathe, because we knew something prior to this pandemic. We knew our kids were not all right. I know we're not talking about yours, we're talking about the neighbors, but here's what we know. These are coming from the most prestigious universities, the CDC, to the World Health Economic. We're looking at UCLA studies that have been tracking our incoming freshmen for 30 years. We're looking at University of Michigan that's doing the same thing. And they discovered something. They discovered that prior to this pandemic, we were doing something really good, parents. We were raising a very smart generation. Their GPAs were going up, up, up. In fact, their IQ points were actually better than ours. Don't tell that to the kids, but they actually are increasing. But despite the fact that they were extremely well loved, they were also the loneliest generation they'd ever seen. They were more anxious and depressed. 1 out of 5 of our American kids prior to the pandemic were going to be diagnosed with a mental health disorder. They were less creative, more risk averse. Our UCLA, our Yale, our Harvard, all of our Ivy League professors said something's going on with the kids. They're coming in here and they're very smart, but they're afraid to raise their hand. They're afraid to take the risk. They're afraid to fail. Adverse, yeah. But what we do know is kids who thrive bounce back and they aren't afraid to fail. They realize that failure is an option because you can think of a different way. They were also less empathetic. And then came the pandemic. What we now know is some very troubling trends. And I want you to be aware of it, because the only reason I'm sharing this with you is that we need to push the reset button on parenting. We now know that our kids need more than just that GPA. Don't you ever stop helping them be successful in school. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying beyond just successful in school, we need to help them learn some skills that they're going to be able to handle life without us. By the way, the real benchmark of good parenting is for your kids eventually to be able to get out there in the real world and handle life without you. With that in mind, let's take a moment and let's talk about resilience, because the first thing is, oh my gosh, I can't do that. It's got to be into their DNA. Or I don't think she's got the right temperament, or she's not the right birth order, or oh my gosh, I don't know are we the right religion, or did I get the right program? Break it, folks, because all of those things about resilience are big myths. What we want are kids who can bounce back. But the first thing is we need a mindset of a group of parents that said, we can do this. And here's what all the science of resilience tells us. First, resilience is not a program. So don't worry, it's not a fancy app and it's not one more tutor. It's just a process. It's processes along the way, experiences our kids have, and it's not going to be a one-day process. It's going to be ongoing. From the moment our children arrive in our homes to the moment they leave us. And by the way, if you've got kids who are college or kids who are married, it's never too late. It's not too late for us either, so don't worry. Second of all, it's not locked. The biggest myth I hear parents saying, oh my gosh, it's part of their DNA. It's not. Not says Amy Werner, not says Ann Matston. All the work on resilience says the thrivers are made, not born. Made, not born. Also, some people think it's fixed. There's a certain little window that, oh my gosh, she can only do it at age 13, or oh my gosh, it's far too late because she's already 5. It's teachable at any age. What we need to do as parents is realize we can weave this in. And please don't worry, this is going to be simple stuff. I'm not going to inundate you with, oh my gosh, I got to do this in relation to everything else. No, parents, we're going to weave this in and make it easy. And it's ongoing. One other little thing that I hear a lot of parents saying is that it's one trait. What's that trait of resilience? It's not. It turns out it's made up of multiple traits. We're going to look at the traits that matter most. And over the next 4 sessions that we're in together, we're going to be talking about, each time we meet, 2 of those critical traits, so that by the time we're done, we're going to have a child who's got all of those traits. You'll have a complete lesson plan that many of us never got. I didn't get it when my kids were born, of science-backed ways to help our kids thrive. And bottom line, it starts with a caring adult. It's not a worksheet or a workbook. It's us. I think the most interesting thing I ever heard was when I was doing this in Egypt. And a father in Cairo actually stood up and said, thank you. I said, for what? He said, I didn't realize how powerful I was as a parent. I always kind of thought parenting was like I was a member of a food chain and my whole goal was just to feed and bathe and help the kids and get them to the right school. I didn't know that I could make such a major difference on how they turned out. If you have questions during this session or any of the other 4 that we're in, please add them to the chat room. I'll be able to take those questions later for you when we're all done. But right now I want you to pause, because I know we need to think for a minute. And from everything you just heard, every once in a while, just like you do with your kids, pause. What's one thing you just heard? Maybe an aha moment that you didn't realize, or something that you want to add to your parenting. I'll start giving you the strategies in a minute. But I think the most important thing you need to know is that resilience is something that is teachable. The second most important thing I want you to know is that it's never been more important than now. Our children were struggling prior to this pandemic. Our children are struggling now. I'll give you some stats that are very terrifying, but that's okay. We can get through it. What we also need to do is get through this together, because if we're strong together, that's how we raise strong kids. I say this to you because parents, I think we're all lonely. We're trying to do too much all by ourselves. Can you reach out and find one other like-minded parent? Or maybe pass it on to the grandparent, or pass it on to great Aunt Sally. But let's pass this information on, because that's how we raise up a strong generation. Now, what matters? The next thing I did, once I went back to UC Davis, and once I became a psychology major, and once I studied this stuff for the next 40 years, I'm telling you, this took me quite a while to figure it out. I began to look at all the science. And I began to ask myself, which of the traits really matter the most? Which are the ones that are teachable, but which are going to help my kid in the classroom as well as in life? Which are going to help my kids not only in the classroom, but also outside the classroom, that are going to be more likely to help his mental health as well as be resilient, as well as, here's another thing, be employed later on. I came down with 7. When you look at these 7, each time we're talking in each one of our webinars, we're going to be addressing simple ways we can weave this in. Today is the framework, and then we're going to look at one in particular. But when you look at these, I want you to realize some points about them. They're first and a scaffold, it looks like, but they're actually not. The only one that seems to really matter the most as a foundation is confidence. And that's the one we're going to be talking about the most today. But all the other 7 seem to add to the plate. And the more these are part of your child's internal piece, it's going to help him become his own personal best. It's going to help him thrive, be happier, healthier, and be more likely to succeed and handle life, whatever comes their way. 7, let's look one more step because I want to go through these a little bit more in depth. And when we're all done, you're going to be getting some handouts that you can use with your kids. One part of the handout is for you to actually analyze which of these strengths are your children's strengths. And please don't assume that all your family has the same strengths. You're going to be also, please, thinking about your own, because the best way to teach any character's strength is by modeling it. So if you were to say, if I can't do anything, maybe the most important thing is do one thing. Look at the 7 traits. I'll talk about them a little bit in a minute, but I want you to ask yourself, when you're all done, before you go to bed at each night, ask yourself the key question. If my child had only my behavior to watch, what would he have caught today? The kids are watching. They do come with little video camera recorders inside their head. They will play you back at the most inopportune moments, usually when the mother-in-law comes. So watch it carefully. Here we go. Let me describe what they are. Let's begin to look at them, and then we'll look at what can we do to make a difference on our kids' lives. I began to look at the 7. I put Post-it notes all over my desk to try to figure out, of the hundreds that kept coming up, which were the most important. First, they have to be universal. And I mention this because here we are in California, but I know that you've got people from Georgia on this call. I know some people from Canada who also have called in. I know that I'm going to be Zooming with people from the Philippines next week and Hong Kong. I want to be able to use these any place and any time because we are a diverse world and our kids are living in a global world. Second of all, we need to be able to optimize our children's performance. Confidence is the foundation. A thriver, by the way, a thriver to me is a child who says, I got this. I got it. It's okay. They have internal agency. Yeah, they may need a GPA and a test score, but a real thriver is a child who also has a self-propelling, self-driven ability to say, it's okay, Mom. And maybe the first thing we need to do is watch our footwork and watch it very carefully. Maybe too much helicoptering actually is disastrous to a thriver. Too much rescuing is disastrous to a thriver. In the end, we want to be able to say to our kids, you got this, sweetie pie. And so maybe the first thing is ask yourself, where are you on the everyday bit with your child right now? Because one little tip that you may want to ask yourself now is where you usually stand. Thrivers' parents kind of stand behind. Helicopter parents stand in front and they pull. So if you're already doing a little bit too much rescuing, that's okay, admit it, how wonderful you did. Now what you do is you take a step back. You take a step back so you stand side by side with your child. And anytime you want to teach a new skill to your child, the first thing you do is you show it with your child. Anytime you want to teach any of these, you show it together. Then you say, you show me, sweetie pie, so I can make sure you know how to make the bed or know how to turn on your computer or know how to use the microwave. I don't care what the skill is. And then you step back. If we keep stepping back and make one rule the rest of our lives, never do for your child what your child can do for yourself, we will begin to raise a thriver who's got that I can do it kind of an attitude. I'm not talking about a 2-year-old. I'm talking about slowly building up a child's agency. Self-confidence is the first one. It's a child who has a strong sense of who I am. Confident children don't necessarily are always talking about their strengths, but they have an inner confidence about their strengths. They rely on their strengths when push comes to shove, and it could be any repertoire of strengths. Today, we're going to be talking about confidence more in depth because it seems to be the foundational piece for thrivers. Confident children really have strong self-understanding. And it's going to take a while, parents. It's going to take quite a while. But the fascinating thing about why that helps a child thrive is they use those strengths to backlog when adversity comes. Do you know what Emmy Werner discovered? Emmy Werner discovered that one of the simple things that thrivers do, ordinary things that thrivers do, is they rely on hobbies. They use their strength, like maybe it's guitar, or maybe it's woodwork, or maybe it's knitting, or maybe it's drawing. Right now, our children need that confidence level. They need to rely on those strengths. And it doesn't mean they're going to get a grade for it. It just means when they really are having a stressful day, they can utilize it and go to it. Thrivers are kids who have confidence. Thrivers' parents are more likely to help the child develop a who I am, not what I want them to be. The second thing that's highly correlated, let me just give you an overview, then we're going to get into depth. Tonight is the overview. The second most highly correlated trait is empathy. What Emmy Werner, Ann Maston, all the research on resilience says is that thrivers usually have social competence. It doesn't mean that they're going to be highly popular children, so don't worry about it. And they can be an introvert as well as an extrovert. So don't get that one wrong either. It's not temperament. It means they have a reliance on people. They have a go-to source, and they know how to use or rely on people when push comes to shove. Let's warn yourself on that one, because our kids have been social distance, haven't they? And what we now know is that one of the most highly correlated traits of resilience is connection, relationships. The second time we talk together, the next week, we'll talk about how do you build empathy in a social distance world. It's a lot easier than you think. The key to good parenting on thrivers is be intentional about it. Third is self-control. You notice that one on your child? We notice that one around the world. In fact, every country that I'm talking to says that is one of the biggest concerns they have. And that is if kids don't have coping strategies to keep the lid on the stress, it builds and builds and builds and builds until pretty soon it goes to anxiety, it goes to depression, and now goes your cognitive capabilities. They're done. Why should we worry? And we should. Well, if 1 in 5 American kids were suffering from a mental health disorder prior to the pandemic, we're now looking at 1 in 4 or 1 in 3. Know something else, parent. And that is, prior to the pandemic, last year at this time, they compared kids who were going to ER visits who were 5 to 11. ER visits for stress or anxiety. And they discovered it wasn't so much, but right now it's a 25% increase than just last year. How about kids who are 12 to 17? It's at a 31% increase. It means it's rising because kids don't have coping skills. One of the things you want to put down on your list is, how do I teach coping skills? I'll show you. Fourth is integrity. I love that one. Wow, do we want kids to have good character? What we discovered is that thrivers have a strong moral code, because sometimes adversity is a mental problem or mental stability, or where all of a sudden they come across some kind of a mental issue of, is it right? Is it wrong? Kids need split second to be able to say it's right, it's wrong, without having to stress it out. And that means thrivers have a strong idea of who they are. What is their moral code? Parents, plant values inside your kid, because that is going to help their resilience. Now comes curiosity. What does that have to do with thriving? A lot. What we now know is one of the highest correlations of kids who thrive is they're problem solvers. They figure out a way around the problem. They're not dumbfounded with, oh my gosh, let me quit. I can't figure out anything else to do. Your kid's going to need that in his classroom as well as on the playground, as well as out in real life. One of the most important things I want you to do from this moment on, when your kid comes running in and he's crying, don't rob him of the opportunity to thrive by giving him the answer or the solution. Instead, sit him down from a young age and say, tell me what's bugging you. Oh, thank you for telling me. Now let's brainstorm what else you could do instead. That's a thriver, a child who says, I got this, I can do it. Then comes the grit, the perseverance. That's your child who's not going to quit, who's going to keep on going. We're going to look at what we now know is just coming from the pandemic. Phenomenal studies are coming out from other countries who are telling us, here's kids who are more capable and thriving during a pandemic. China just released a study. Kids who have perseverance, who have a growth mindset, who don't think it's fixed, but say, that's okay, if I just keep working on it, it'll get better, are kids who are more likely to thrive. And finally comes optimism. Optimism is that sense that says, I got hope. I know it's dismal. I know it's bad out there, but they've got a reality check. It doesn't mean they're Pollyannas, but it means they're able to keep the lid on pessimism. So when that adversity comes, they're going, I got a way around it. Here's my next question to you. We'll go each one of these far more in depth, but my first question to you is, of these 7, what do you think your child already is thriving in? Which ones are those that are his innate strengths? Younger kids, it's going to take a while, but usually there's 1 or 2 that is a strength area. And then maybe you can say, here's the one I want to work a little more on. You'll get some handouts later on that'll actually give you a core asset survey that you're going to be able to figure out those abilities. Everything is in the book Thrivers. Each chapter is one of those 7 traits. Let's keep going, because there's one other thing you need to know, and then we're going to move ahead. Your next question, I already can anticipate it. Which is the most important one? Or do they need all 7? They don't need all 7. It's a rare you that has all 7, right? I don't have all 7. Who's got all 7? But the more you have, the better you are. The more likely you are to be able to handle adversity. It's called a multiplier effect. And that means when you put any 2 strengths together, it multiplies the odds and makes them stronger so that the child is far more likely to endure. That's why we're doing 4 sessions. We're doing them so you really understand how to teach all of these, so your child has the foundation to thrive. There you go. If you got a question, write it in the chat box. But let's keep moving ahead, because there's one other thing I want you to know. I know we spend all our time trying to get our kid out the door, to get them employed and into college. But the number one time our children are most likely to drop out is end of freshman year, first semester of college. They get to college. Some of them are even getting to full scholarships to college. But college professors are saying that we are seeing a different breed of children. They're empty. They don't have the coping skills. They're very smart, but they don't have the resilience factors. I mention this because these are just 3 of the many colleges across the country who are now doing resilient projects, because they're so concerned that the incoming college freshmen in Ivy League schools are lacking that we're talking about in these next 4 sessions. If there's any bang for, let's reset the dial, parent. Let's figure out how we're going to make a difference on our kids' lives, and let's do it now. If you could do anything, make it be intentional. And here we go. One other little thing, I made the skills, or these strengths that we're going to be talking about, the 7 of them. I think the other thing that we've been doing is that we put it all on the cognitive hype. Most of our kids, when I interviewed them, and I'm going to be telling you some pretty dismal stories, but as I was writing Thrivers, I interviewed hundreds of kids. I went across the country, and counselors gave me access to kids who've got a pretty darn good pulse on what's going on with their friends and themselves. Every kid I interviewed said, you know, we are the most stressed out generation on record, and somebody better teach us coping skills. But the second thing they told us is almost every one of them said, we're kind of like we're running on empty. Many of them said the things we seem to be lacking are the stuff of the human stuff. How to get along with others, how to read one another, how to cope, how to keep on enduring. What we seem to be missing, again, not you, but the neighbor next door, is that we packaged our kids into all the cognitive hype. And as a result, the whole child has kind of been lacking. And so the other thing you'll see is that we'll be talking about these 7 traits in terms of heart, mind, and will. You put the heart, mind, and will together, and what you're going to have is a whole child who can handle life, whatever comes their way. You ready? Write down anything you want to remember, because what you just got was the crash course overview to everything you need to know about resilience. I hope the most important thing is you realize it's teachable and it's never too late. The next thing we'll look at is today, self-confidence, because I think it is the foundation level skill that all children need, all adults need. This is the piece that Bill Damon says only 20% of incoming college freshmen into Stanford now have. They're lacking a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning over their life. And that's why so many of them are kind of running on empty. Colleges are now, prior to the pandemic, parents running out of college counselors because the depression rates are so high amongst our kids. The most dismal thing that I learned simply when I was writing this book was I got a couple of calls that I said, okay, I'm writing Thrivers. Didn't really want to write one more book, but I got a call once from a group from Arizona. Please come, they said. We have lost in 20 miles, 40 kids who have ended their lives in the last 2 years from suicide. Pretty well-loved kids from a nicer area were finding the same thing. During the pandemic, Las Vegas Dale schools have lost 21 kids. Let's figure out how to build them up from the inside out, folks. That's what confidence is building up from the inside out. There's 3 skills. You'll always see the 3 skills that seem to matter most because those are the teachable ones. We're going to start with helping our kids and you be aware of who this child is, who this kid is, what are his strengths, Too often, what we now know is we spend more time on their weaknesses, trying to fix them, as opposed to relying on their strengths. I'm not saying don't stop helping your kid if he's struggling with math, but don't overlook the gold nuggets of your child. The second thing is, besides self-awareness, is their strength awareness, the stuff that is their nuggets, that really is who they are. And finally, help that child find their purpose. And that purpose is going to actually lower depression and give more meaning into their lives. With that in mind, one little point to keep you going. I love this because it's 5 days after World War II. All these stories are in Thrivers, and this is one of my favorite ones. And there's the woman. They're sitting in a very far northern village in Italy, and they're looking at the desecration of their village that has been destroyed from a war. 4 days after the war, they sit with their children, and the mothers begin to talk about, what are we going to do differently for our kids so this doesn't happen again? What do our kids are going to need in order to really be able to handle life? It's not just going to be ABCs and math, facts, and spelling. Let's help them become critical thinkers, they said. Let's help them know who they are. Let's help them become more child-driven. Let's help them stand up for themselves. And on the spot, what they did is they actually stood up in the rubble and began to find bricks and began to place them over the side where there was a big vacant lot. One vacant lot. One by brick, by brick, by brick. What the women decided to do was build a school. The school was going to do those exact same things. What's going to raise children, they said, to be thrivers. Along came a bicyclist. He was a teacher. They said, would you be willing to be the teacher? He bought into their philosophy. It became the Reggio Emilia School. It's actually in the village of Reggio Emilia. And in 1990, it was listed as one of the top 10 best schools in the world. It all started with intentionality. It started with a group of moms saying our kids need something most. And I think that's the same thing that's happened to our children right now. They're in the midst of a pandemic, and maybe it's our moment to say our kids need something more. What's it going to be? It's going to be self-confidence, and here we go. The first thing I want you to ask yourself is think about each of your kids. I've got 3 kids, so I'm going to have to think about each one of them a little differently. You're going to get this core assets survey, so don't go trying to read it. You're going to get it when we're all done. But the most important thing is, would you please take a few minutes, a few days, a few weeks if you need to maybe walk around with an index card and watch each of your children a little bit closer. What are their gifts? What are their positive traits? What are you seeing? And how would you describe each of your children to somebody who was an old friend who just came up, who's never met your child? How would you positively describe that child? Usually when you describe your child in that particular version, particularly, you never say the bad stuff to an old girlfriend, would you? Instead, it's here's the positive parts about them. Next question is, ask yourself, if those are the positives, how are you going to nurture those strengths? Because Emmy Werner and all of the work on resilience says that's what your kids are going to rely on. That's what's going to help them bounce back. That's what's going to help them thrive. Let's look at it. Later on, would you promise me that you'll download the asset survey, that you'll take a little bit of time with a different color marking pen for each child? You'll be able to go through and figure out, for instance, their learning styles. What do they gravitate toward? What are they eager about? What are their hobbies? What are their interests? What are the kinds of clubs that when the door is open, you want to enroll them in? Kids don't need everything. They don't. But they really are more likely to shine if you tailor them toward the areas that they seem to be a little bit more thrilled about and energized. In fact, there's some fascinating things we've discovered, and I want to break some myths again. Benjamin Bloom, study number 1. He looked at our children who were the most incredibly talented kids that we have. I mean, he studied Olympic gold medalists, neurosurgeons, the best musicians, the best artists, to find out how they became that way. And what he discovered along the way, when he interviewed them all and backtracked them through, they were not raised by tiger moms. They weren't pushed to death. In fact, they weren't told you could only play violin, piano, or tennis. What they discovered is that the parents from very early age did exactly what I'm saying. They found the child's natural interests, their natural talent. And the first teachers of those children that were highly gifted later on were always fun and child directed, kind of like the Reggio Emilia School. The second thing is, we all want our kids to be happy, don't you? Yeah, of course you do. You all want them to mentally thrive, don't you? Of course you do. Well, another study, this one's called FLOW, University of Chicago. What they did is they looked at us, the adults, as well as kids in high school, as well as kids in college. Which are the kids that are most likely to be happy, to be content, to be mentally stable? What they discovered is that it was when they were engaged in things that they really loved to do. Now, here's the point. When I asked the kids, when I interviewed them all, what are your hobbies? Almost every kid said, what's a hobby? I don't have time for hobbies. In fact, the other thing that's fascinating is, once again, another study called Talented Teens. Are kids that really, and I'm telling you, we're not going to get that kid. It's a rare parent who gets one of these kinds of kids, and this isn't the goal. But our most immensely talented kids give up their talent around the age of 13. Why? They don't have time to pursue it. Here's the time, folks. Right now, the first trait of thriving is a hobby, is an interest. Does your child have one? And don't worry if they don't, because you've got this thing called time. When each week, what you can do as a family is introduce a hobby to your whole family. Maybe it's woodwork, maybe it's art, maybe it's music, maybe it's turning on a PBS channel, maybe it's geography, maybe it's travel. Introduce different things, and don't feel like you got to do this yourself, because I'm telling you, half those things I'm not so good at. And this is when you rely on grandparents. This is you rely on relatives. Grandma can come in and say, I'll do a Zoom baking class. Or Great Aunt Sally, I'll teach them how to knit. Introduce your kids to different hobbies. Once you know the child is more interested in the strength, he's going to use it the rest of his life. Right now, what our kids are using is digital driven stuff. New York Times is worried that the average child is becoming very, very addicted. That's not a hobby. Fortnite is not a hobby. It is if you are looking at a screen with another person on the other side, or you're playing a game with the person on the other side, or you're doing a book club read aloud with the person on the other side. Maybe you're playing chess with the person on the other side. Talent, use the term TALENT. And the first thing is, just watch each of your kids without them knowing. What does your child do when he's a little more tenacious? What activity is he involved in? Is it basketball? Is it swimming? What is he a little more focused in? Notice that our kids' focusing ability is all over the plate. And when stress builds, focusing ability goes down. But we do know that focusing ability is strongest when you're engaged in things that are your strength. And many times what we can do is help our kids get back into focusing by getting the strength area. Their attention is longer. These are things at school that they learn easier. That's usually a strength area. That could be their learning style. For some kids, it's math. For some kids, it's spelling. For some kids, it's science. What's your kid's strength area? They're a little bit more eager when you say it's time for chess or it's time for the swim lesson. Yeah. And when the club closed, oh my gosh, there was such a need. Oh my gosh, Mom, now what am I going to do? The tone in the child's voice is more excited. I can't get the cake right now, Mom. I really need to finish with the woodwork. That's your key. Now, it doesn't mean that they're doing that all day and all life, but we do know one thing. Our children need desperate times to decompress. Emmy Werner said, this is one of the best stress reducers there is. Let me give you an example of a stress reducer. One of the kids I interviewed, I love her. Her name was Natalie. She was 14. And what she told me was real simple in life. She said, I love music. So I downloaded all different kinds of music on my iPad. That's what I love. That's actually her hobby. She also plays guitar. But I said, what helps you? She said, Mozart. It's got soothing tone. I really go to Mozart. But she said, when something goes really well, I crank up Elton John and I start pacing around the house. I'm still standing. She says, I also have discovered I love Agatha Christie. And I went, you've got to be kidding. Agatha Christie? How did you discover Agatha Christie? That's a little unusual for a 14-year-old. She says, I ran out of books. My mother had a whole bunch of them. So maybe it's just putting things around so your child can enjoy them. Now, let's start instilling confidence in your child. First, you may want to define a strength area to a child. And a real simple one is pick up your pencil with your right hand or your left hand, whatever the hand is you usually write, and go ahead and write your name. See how easy it is? Now pick up your pencil, unless the kid is ambidextrous, and try writing with your other hand. A strength is the one that makes it easier for you to do. We're now going to start looking for your strengths. Hold strength talks with your children. For a very young kid, it could be nothing more than, here's a reminders of things you're good at, sweetie pie. And it's not like you're lavishing the praise. They've got to really earn and deserve the praise. Ask what, not why. What do you like to do? What is something that makes you more interested? Most of the time when we ask, why do you like that? Kids are going to look at you like, I don't know. But the research says if you ask what kind of questions, it helps you. Look at your pictures around the house. Go ahead, look at your pictures. Look at the pictures you're sending grandma. Are any of the pictures images of your children's strengths? I know you got 50,000 trophies on your mantle, but does your children love the trophies? Are they something that are near and dear to the kid's heart? What we now know is that praising our kids to death does not build their confidence. No. Very often, if we praise them the wrong way, it just kind of builds up their narcissism. But if we let them know, I notice that you're really good at this, or I notice that you really seem to enjoy that, you're helping the child. Taking a picture of it reminds them of it. And again, offer hobbies. Other ideas, let me share something that happened to me. And that would be me, the one on the far corner over there. I taught special ed for years, but I want to share something with you about one of the children in my class. Now, this is a class with children with severe learning disabilities. And I taught severe learning disability children for years. Some of you I know have a child with a learning disability or some kind of a challenge. Don't undermine the child. Don't undermine the child. Because the learning disability doesn't mean he's not going to shine. In fact, one of the things I did through Thrivers is deliberately give you stories and stories about very, very famous people who had enormous challenges in learning or something else in their life and overcame. The little guy who's right next to me is the child that I like to share a little bit about because I learned something about confidence with this child. He's precious. He's always there. Yes, he has a severe learning disability, but he also had a very strong IQ, but it wasn't materializing because this child had no confidence. Anytime if I try to praise him, you try to praise your child, you get a re-jerk, you get a, no, I'm not mom, I can't do anything right. Children who don't have a strong sense of belief in themselves are going to have a tough time handling the adversity because they're more likely to give up. And that's why I'm trying to build up this sense of thriving. And so I would watch and watch, just like you do, to try to figure out something this kid was good at. And one day I discovered that, lo and behold, he was seeming to enjoy drawing. And it was the one day he forgot to cover it up. Now, if I praised him on the spot, here's my warning to you. If I praised him on the spot, oh, Michael, you're so good at drawing, I think he would have ripped it. But instead, what I did is use it, and a parent use it. And then what you do is simply in life is start finding other ways to help this child slowly evolve. I told his parents, I think he enjoys art. I found some other parents to come in and do some drawing lessons in the class because I wasn't so good at it. And slowly, I mean, it took quite a long time. Don't think this is going to happen overnight, parents. But what began to happen is that he began to feel a little more comfortable until one day he forgot to cover up the fact he was artistic and forgot to cover up the fact that he was in flow and enjoying it. And that was the day that I quietly asked him, may I put your work on the bulletin board? I asked his permission. He shyly kind of said, yes, I put it up on the bulletin board and something happened. A few of the other kids milled around the board, turned around and said, wow, Michael, you're really artistic. It was the first time I saw the child smile. I kept trying to build and nurture his art abilities. I didn't see any big change, but I did see confidence because I found his strength. And then what happened? Well, he went on to the next class and the next class and the next class. If you're a teacher, I want to urge you to do one little thing, and that is Murray Elementary. What they're doing is spending years and days trying to figure out what each child's strength is. They're putting each child's strength on an index card, figuring it out all year long, and then for each child, taking the ring off and passing it on to next year's teacher. That's what I did for Michael. I passed it on to each next year's teacher. I see the same thing at a high school. The high school is doing the same thing of using this as a role of here's some things you're good at and passing it on. Making one big Google Doc, particularly for kids who are struggling teachers, that's what we need. Well, I lost him. He kept going on. I know that he was starting to win some art competitions. And then finally, I didn't know what happened to him. I didn't know if he'd ever graduate. I was hoping for the best until years later, something happened to me. And that is, I got a letter. Teachers live for these moments. Parents write the teacher a letter. The letter was from Michael. And the letter said, "Hi, Mrs. Borba. I just wanted you to know that I graduated from high school," which shocked me. I also graduated from college as an art major. I almost fell to the floor. But he said, I've been always wanting to thank you for one thing. You changed my life when you put my art on the bulletin board. Go figure. He said, that was the moment that I realized I was somebody deep inside, that I had the confidence that I could do. He said, I just wanted to thank you for that and to let you know that I'm now working as an animator I won't tell you the name of the studio, but you know the studio very well. Keep in mind, that's what we're looking for. Teach kids confidence, teach your child confidence, acknowledge their core assets, who they are. If you want to start with praise, then use earshot praise. That's a really simple little thing to do. Dad, you should see Michael's artwork. You won't believe how great it is. Without the kid knowing that he's supposed to be eavesdropping, it quadruples it. Use nouns, not verbs. That means, hey, I see that you really enjoy helping, not you're a help. Would you like to help? I see that you really love to be a helper. When we phrase it like that, it seems to be from the research that it helps instill positive identity. Carve in some time for your child. Carve in some time so they can do this and praise the child's effort. I know it's hard, just like Michael, but you're getting better and better at it. There's so many things you could do. Teacher, here's another thing that you can do. Just so you know, please, parent, that this could take you quite a while to get going. But here's what I suggested, and I suggest for all of you. And that is, here's one child who was really struggling in a classroom. Parent, you can do the same thing at home. But this child was so lacking confidence. Everything was torqued over. Her ability to thrive was really truncated because she had no internal strong sense of who I am. And so the teacher decided that every day she'd meet her at the door and do nothing more than tell her that she legitimately had a good smile. Don't praise the child unless it's legitimate. Every day she'd praise her. And then I said, but write down her reaction. And she'd write down the reaction. The first day she said, what's the point of this? She's hiding her face. She looks really distraught. She's covering it up. I said, keep going. Because what happens is kids test us. They want to see if we really mean we're serious about it. She kept doing it because I said, change happens around 21 days. And that's exactly what happened. I've received more of these from teachers than any other activity that I tried. Each teacher emails me and she says, you won't believe it. It's changed the child's life. You won't believe what a difference it has made. So parents, my comment to you is, once you find a legitimate something about the child, keep slowly building it up. Slowly building it up. Those are the pass it on cards. Teacher, let's pass them on. Let's let other teachers, other parents know. Parent, let the teacher know what your child's interests are. Let's figure out where their confidence level is. If there are clubs, there's after school clubs, find them. One of the things we all could be doing right now is Zooming with one another. I'll do the books because I can do a book club because I love books. Just give me 5 kids and we'll all Zoom at the same time. How that can free us all up, parents. We're all inundated. We're all stressed. Or maybe we could do another thing. One dad said, well, I'll teach yoga. Another father said, well, I can help your child learn basketball. I'll just get a video outside. What I'm saying to you is that we can make a difference on our children's abilities to thrive. One of the most important things that I want to verify is a study that was also done by, it's called Cradles of Eminence. 2 amazing psychologists looked at the backgrounds of 700 of the most famous individuals. We're talking from Einstein to Eleanor Roosevelt to Mother Teresa, all of the lists, and they discovered something that they weren't prepared for. A very large portion of them had major handicaps in their lives, suffered from extraordinary adversity in their lives. Many of them had learning challenges. But they all bounced back, didn't they? And the single commonality was that every one of them had a you in their life who refused to give up on the child. What you did is say, but here's your moment to shine. And as a result, you did. Set some unplugged sacred time so kids are away from them. I warn you about this one because our kids are becoming addicted right now, and rightly so. Hey, in all fairness, that cell phone is their lifeline to their friends. But along the way, when the school doors open up, let's start rebuilding. Here's what our family standards are. If you want to have one thing, then strike a balance. Strike a balance and start pulling back. You can use it if it's with someone, if you see their face. And when we talk about empathy the next time, you're going to see why that's so important. Remember that our kids are socializing far less than ever. And that was prior to the pandemic. They're using the internet more prior to the pandemic. So it's only going to amplify it all. Let's figure out how to build them up. These are projects that schools are using. The Capstone Project, what they were so concerned about high school kids graduating that they didn't know who they are. So as a result, what they're now doing is having the kids prior to graduation figure out who I am. Write an essay about yourself and then turn around and present it to all of us as a speech saying, here's who I am. The reason is that many of the kids were writing these highfalutin, wonderful essays about themselves, but they weren't real. The sad thing is we are discovering that our children's confidence is kind of dooming. Our children are feeling empty. Other schools are doing personal projects. What's something you care desperately about? But you can do these at home, parents. What is something you really care about, sweetie pie? What's something that worries you? Well, then let's do something about it. That's what gives your children a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. There's so many things you can do. I want to mention just one other thing, and that is this. I have been in some extraordinary places in my life. And sometimes you wonder if there's any hope for kids. I was in a refugee camp in Lebanon where it was so dismal with rabid dogs on one side. Don't go that way, Dr. Borba. There's drug dealers over there. Watch the electric wires, Dr. Borba. You'll get electrocuted. You kept walking through the camp going, God, is there really hope for kids? And then they said, go up the stairs, turn around the corner and walk through that door. I did. And what did I find? A chess club. A chess club with plastic chess sets. The children would walk in after school and you'd see their whole face start to beam. There was stress outside the door. You could see it. They were hurting. They walked in the door and now they had a moment to shine. This was their place where they could thrive. Now, there was one man, remember Emmy Warner said, one caring champion who refused to give up on the child. He walked the camp and said, there's nothing that's safe and trusting for these kids. What's going to give them a sense of agency? He offered the chess club. And when I asked the kids, what do you like about it? They told me, it makes me think. It makes me stop worrying about the stress that I have. I realized that my brain is mathematical. Over and over again, children began to thank that particular teacher. There's the camp, just so you know, that's the dismal nun. Each one of us can make a major difference on our children's lives. I've shared with you a couple of things about, first, the foundation to resilience, and second of all, the foundation to it, which is the first strength, which is thriving. We're going to be talking about each of these far, far more in depth. Tonight was the bird's eye starting point of here's what thriving is. And each week we talk. Next time we're talking empathy and self-control. You already know resilience. We're diving straight in. Next time, it's then the week after, it will be about how to help your kid develop a moral core, how to help your kid learn that problems aren't so great. They all can be solved. And finally, how to keep perseverance and optimism alive despite a pandemic, because it's all doable. My website's michelleborba.com. I know so many of you have a copy of the book Thrivers. You can go ahead and read along with us because this is kind of like a book discussion as we do. Each chapter is one of those. It's on Amazon right now at a 40% discount, but I'm going to turn this back to you and say, is there one thing you want to remember for your own family? One simple thing, parents. Maybe it's just, I'm going to be a little more intentional about helping my kids learn to thrive. Or I'm going to find their hobby. or I'm going to baby model calmness. It doesn't make any difference what you choose. Write it on a Post-it note, put it on your mirror, and keep looking at it. And if you do it for at least 21 days, you'll be the one that's going to help your children learn to thrive. I'm going to turn this back to you. If you've got questions, go for it. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Borba. That was fantastic. And we're going to turn it over to Renee from here to close this out.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Borba. I know that I've heard you talk a few times, and every single time I still get goosebumps. So we really appreciate you being here with us. You make an impact in our lives, even though many of us have been doing it for years also. There are some great comments in the chat box, people saying thank you, how amazing you are. The things you have to share are so simple that make such a dramatic difference. Everybody appreciates that. And we know that everybody here today is going to want to come back next week, because you're going to continue to share all of the great things we need to hear as parents, as educators, everybody that's here today. We only have one question. We know our time is already 6 o'clock, but I'll read it really, really quickly because I know you probably have a comment on this. It says, here we go. Acknowledging the 7 ingredients of thriving, shouldn't colleges, Ivy League schools, and hiring practices for professional lives integrate these ingredients better instead of initially only focusing on best grades, extracurricular curriculums, best and overqualified resumes? Otherwise, there won't be a discrepancy in how we build up our kids from the inside out versus the requirements the institutions and workplace require, without acknowledging these 7 ingredients, but just focusing on the aforementioned. So,
I love it. I love it. And I'm with you. But here you go. You ready? First of all, go download right now, Making the Grade on Google. It's a Harvard study. And what they are doing is going across the board with all Ivy League schools. We're the first to sign on and agree with exactly what you just said. They're with you. Other colleges are now with you. They're slowly beginning to change it because they realize, and you're seeing that in terms of SAT is now also being changed as a requirement coming into many schools. They are seeing that children are mentally stressed out. The reason I wrote Thrivers is one other reason. And that is I was dealing with 2,500 mental health counselors across college campuses who said, these kids are running on empty and we've got to change. So they began to change their policies. Harvard now says, for instance, the top employability factor is empathy. Notice that what now major businesses across the world are doing, confidence, strength finders. Almost when you walk in, you're going to get a copy of Cliff Notes strength finders to figure out what you're good at. It's a slow process, but it's slowly coming down the pike. And I think the pandemic is also going to help you because our children are not thriving. They are smart, but they're not thriving. When we teach these other skills, particularly these 7, which are highly correlated to academic performance as well as employability, they're also going to give your kids an edge in school as well as in life. So thank you for the question. I'm with you.
We knew you would be. So since we are at 6:03, we hope everybody enjoyed tonight and that you're going to come back next week to find out more golden nuggets that you share with us every week. Everybody will be receiving a reminder email for next week, and make sure you share it with other people that will be able to benefit from this as well. So thank you, Dr. Borba.
You're welcome. Please come next week, because the most important thing you're going to be learning next week is 50,000 coping skills. How to teach kids how to cope and reduce that stress. Every one of them is so simple and doesn't cost a dime. And how do we rebuild empathy with a social distance group of kids who now tell us they're extremely lonely and they're very worried about going back to school. Most of them, 70% of parents now say their number one concern is not, can the kid catch up with the grade? Their number one concern is the kids are so anxious about, what do I do seeing kids that I haven't seen in such a long time? We're going to be hitting those 2 big next week. Anything
and
else?
Dr. Borba, one of the moms said, mommy needs coping skills refresher as well. So
yep.
Parents, we need that as well. We need to build up our own confidence through these pandemics. So great stuff. We appreciate it. So everybody that's here, this is the end for tonight. We want to respect your time so you can go spend time with your families. We appreciate you being here. If you didn't see in the chat box, this 4-week series will also be held in June. That will be in the morning for families that either want to watch it again, that couldn't make it this time. Make sure you go to the Padlet. We will be posting the recording in English with the ASL interpretation, a recording of the Spanish translation, so you guys can access it multiple ways. And again, thank you for being here.